What up, motherfucks? It feels like your boy has been beating a dead horse for a while now, bitches. The fact of the matter is this. Wrestling is shit now, and the reason that it's shit primarily is the Young Bucks. Just kidding. I mean, not really, but they're definitely part of it. It's just wrestling not taking itself seriously. Now let me tell you a little story about this, motherfucks. When I was a wee little lad, right? I was maybe in 4th or 5th grade, a new immigrant to the United States of America. A bunch of people that I knew and I were hanging out, and their little cousin was visiting. She was like a couple of years younger than me, so she must have been in 3rd grade, motherfucks. Maybe in 2nd grade, I don't know. Let's say 3rd, right? And she came over to their house, and I was there, and she's also wasn't from America. And she was little, right? So she watched wrestling with us, and she thought it was real, right? And one of my friends was tricking her, telling her it was real, just to fuck with her, because he thought it was funny, right? And the other one joined in, and I was trying to tell her, like, look, it's fake. You know, like, they're tricking you. Like, your cousins, they're tricking you, you know? And she's like, no, why would they do that? Like, plus, like, I can tell that it's real, you know? I'm like, what do you mean you can tell? She's like, look. She's like, how could it not hurt if one woman, there was like, I think it was like Ivory and like Barbara Bush. Remember Barbara Bush? And they were like having like a backstage brawl, and one of them was pulling the hair of the other, and then eventually throws her on the table, right? And my friend, who I'm still friends with today, like she was so young and she didn't never seen wrestling, she just assumed it was real, you know? She was like, what the hell? Like, how can you fake this? Like, how can you fake someone breaking a table with her body, right? Now, she is a very smart girl, by the way. She's not like an idiot or anything like that, you know? So she's like an architect now or some shit. So, basically, like, she was so confused as to what was happening that she assumed it was real. You know? Now, part of this was she didn't speak English at the time. You know what I mean? And therefore, she couldn't understand, or even if she did speak English, she was little and she didn't really understand the lingo of like the mid-90s, right? And she wouldn't have known like that this is clearly a show, right? And a lot of people didn't know this, you know, or a lot of people thought it was somewhere between a show and reality, right? Like the idea that like, all right, it's a show, but you know, sometimes it's personal and people hate each other, and even though they're doing a job, like they hate each other. That's when wrestling is best. You know, like one of the best feuds ever, Edge versus Matt Hardy, right? It was personal, you know. It was obviously a work. People kept asking, they're like, is it a work? You know, there was a legitimate worry, for example, that Matt Hardy might jump onto Edge, do the leg drop, and try to purposely hurt him. You know what I mean? There's always the possibility of that. So wrestling became interesting, right? But primarily, the reason why it was interesting was because it was serious, right? It was serious. It was something that if someone who didn't watch wrestling watched it, they would at least, especially if they were a kid, but even if they were an adult, they would at least, for example, think like, oh, I see. This might be real, right? Even for a brief moment, you know, that's all wrestling requires of you. Even for a brief moment, will this happen? An old school episode of Raw could capture you from the beginning to the end. Because in the beginning, they would set something up. They'd be like, me versus you tonight, let's say, right? And even if you're someone that just tuned in, you're like, oh, these guys just said some horrible shit to each other. Now they're going to fight? I want to see this, you know? And then it's up to the medium of wrestling to capture you further, right? Because seeing two people yell at each other and say, I'm going to kick your ass tonight, right? Might not be good enough for most of us, right? But then when you see the ass kicking, if it looks real, right? And it involves cool things, you know, somewhere in there, you're able to like kind of like set aside your personal beliefs about it being fake or seeming fake, right? That's why we all get pissed off when botches happen, right? Especially botches where the person doesn't do the move and then the other guy acts like the move was done anyways, you know? Or when someone clearly misses a punch or a kick, you know? It takes you out of it. It reminds you that it's fake. Because when you watch wrestling, you're not thinking to yourself, oh, these guys are friends, right? Maybe now I think that way because I've been watching for so long and I'm like a big time fan now and I got my channel and everything. But typically that's not what I think, right? But I immediately think that when wrestling takes me out of wrestling. You know, when things happen that just remind me that it's fake. And at this point in time, right, during this last year especially, but, you know, even the last few years, I'd say, right, it's gotten to the point where wrestling not only takes you out of the moment, it does so, number one, on purpose, and number two, in jest, right? It does it and makes fun of you, right? The underlying subtext of a lot of these matches is that this shit is so fake that we can do the dumbest fake shit in the world, right? And this reflects on you as a viewer, right? That's my biggest concern with things like the Boneyard match and the John Cena nonsense, right? This isn't a movie, you know? It's not a movie, right? This is supposed to be treated as something special, as a hybrid between a sport and entertainment, right? This medium, like the greater medium of sports entertainment, right? Now it's just WWE. But for a while back in the day, there were other things that were sports entertainment, right? Like American Gladiators, you know? Like there was this implicit idea, like that was more competition than it was like fakeness. But there was this implicit idea that the gladiators had an issue with each other, right? The show, what is it called? Battle Dome. They had Terry Crews in there before he was famous, right? He was T-Money, motherfucks. He had a gimmick and everything. He was like this black guy who wore a lot of gold, you know? He was like a pimp, basically, right? Like a big, tough guy from the streets, but now he has a lot of money. They call him T-Money, you know what I'm saying? And he would feud with like Michael O'Dell or whatever, like the bodybuilder guy. And his gimmick was he was like a Greek god, you know? He was like this like angelic, like blonde, you know, like big dude, you know? So it was inherently interesting, right? Sure, during the show they had these motherfucks that were out there like competing against T-Money and Michael O'Dell or whatever, right? But that wasn't really the draw of it. The draw of it was the interactions between the stars, right? Between the actors, between Michael O'Dell and Terry Crews, T-Money, you know what I'm saying? So, and then they had, of course, Roller Jam, right? Which was wrestling on roller skates, basically, right? Same premise, fixed results, right? But it was entertaining, right? Because you look at it and you're like, all right, number one, I can respect the athleticism, which makes it interesting, right? It's like, okay, like I have something to watch because I like watching people do flips, right? Like my dad always says, he's like, if you watch wrestling so much and if you love it so much, he's like, why don't you go watch the circus? You know, they're more athletic there. And I'm like, yeah, good point, Dad, you know? So, but it was presented as serious always. Even with over-the-top characters like T-Money and Michael O'Dell, right? Which are like the most stereotypical people ever, right? It was still presented seriously. And that's what we need to get from this, right? The serious presentation of wrestling has fallen over the years, right? And this has led, in my opinion, to the downfall of wrestling. Now, how did this all start, right? Well, you can point the finger and point the blame at a lot of things. Okay, number one, you can point the finger and the blame, I hate to say it, motherfuckers, but I gotta say it like it is, the ECW, right? ECW really, really did a good job with blurring the line. You know, that's one of the things that made ECW so great. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I suggest you go on YouTube after watching this video, motherfuckers. Don't leave my video, bitches, right? After you finish this video, go on YouTube and search 1999 Heat Wave Dudley Boys promo, right? That promo was fucking awesome, right? Bubba Ray Dudley, one of the most underrated on the mic, pretty much makes the crowd lose their fucking shit. He threatens people in the crowd. He spits at a woman in the crowd. He's making fun of them like individually, you know, and as a crowd, right? And it felt real. Like there's a part where Bubba Ray says, if me and Devon had time, we would come out there and kick each and every one of your asses, right? So basically like him and Devon have no reason to hate the crowd other than the crowd hates them. So he's like, no, we'd beat your ass if we had time, but we don't, you know, so we're going to have to deal with this match here instead, right? The point being that it makes the fans feel like they're part of something, you know? Even the fans, I've seen this in independent wrestling shows. There was this woman, I thought she was a complete savage. This woman that was in the crowd at an independent wrestling show that I went to many years ago, right? And she spat on one of the like managers. Like one of the wrestlers had a manager. Like I didn't know the storylines because I didn't like follow this independent wrestling league, right? But like I went to it and clearly one of them had like a manager, and the manager was supposed to be this like smooth talking cowboy type, right? With like a hat. He looked like Pitbull. That's what I remember, right? And this woman just spat on him, right? Like she said something to him, right? He turned around and he was like, you dumb bitch or whatever, right? Like, but he was in character, you know. Clearly he was playing the part, and she spat right in his face, and he didn't do anything. He just wiped the spit off and continued his duties, right? But like now, this savage, this stupid bitch shouldn't have spat on him because he's doing his job. But the facts are what the facts are. This means that the guy did a really good job at pissing her off, right? Like she's not retarded. She knows it's fake, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter because in that moment she forgot that it's fake. Or she's a dumbass, she's a stupid redneck who really thinks it's real, and then she's a bitch and should have spat on the guy. The point is, it had to be real. So the same way that ECW really helped with making wrestling feel real, right, by having these interactions between wrestler and fan, right, people like wrestlers challenging fans to come down from the balconies to fight them, shit like that, ECW also ruined it, right? They ruined it because the sheer violence that ECW perpetrated, right, would leave no room for any kind of storyline to then further develop, right? So it's like, if, let's say, I don't know, let's say the Dudley Boys put Spike Dudley through a flaming table, right? You know, it's a really tough sell to then be like, oh, Spike Dudley and the Dudley Boys in 3 weeks are going to team up. No, motherfucks. You just put me through a flaming table, you know? That, plus the fact that ECW became a little hokey, right? It became a little bit unbelievable. It was just like, all right, this is like so intense and so extreme. I don't mean extreme just like in the violence, but like, it's like you had like whoever was, Dawn Marie or whatever, or Francine, the one that would come out with like the caution tape that covered like her boobs and her vagina, right? It's like so over the top that like it reminded you that this shit's not real, right? It's so over the top that you are reminded once again that this shit you're watching is fake. That Bubba Ray and Devon don't really want to beat your ass, that they don't really hate any of the fans, and they're just doing their job, right? It reminds you of that, you know? So ECW did that for sure. WWE, I believe, really got it right. More so than WCW, and more so than ECW, right? WWF, I should say, in the Attitude Era really got it right. Where there was a good amount of fan interaction, right? And very few moments that the show took you out, where you're like, oh, this isn't real, right? Think about what WWE is, or any wrestling like company, right? It is a big time show, right? It's a show with like 100 characters, you know, some more important than others, but it's situated in such a way where different characters can go up and down the ranking, the hierarchy of the show, right? So think about how much potential there is, but it all has to be serious. One slip from the serious, and it becomes stupid, right? So think of it this way, motherfucks. Let's say you're watching, I don't know, what's a popular show now? You know, I'm trying to think of a show that's like popular, but it's not like lame. You know, it's not like with zombies or like dragons or all this stupid shit. You know, like a show, like a serious show. I don't know, motherfucks, fuck it, Law and Order, let's go with that one. Tried and true, motherfucks, Law and Order. Let's say you're watching Law and Order, right, which is a serious show, right? It's about like people, let's say it's Law and Order SVU. It's about these cops who are trying to like stop like rapists and shit like that, right? Now imagine if like, you know, midway through the episode, Ice-T turns around and says, you know what, I'm actually a vampire, right? You'd be like, what the fuck? Or even worse, imagine he turns around and he says, yo, what's up, it's Ice-T. You'd be like, whoa, wait a second, no, it's not Ice-T, it's Finn Tutuola. Remember him, motherfucks? Right? You play a character on the show. There is no room for you to like break that character, right? And there's no room for the show to break conventions that extremely. A few videos ago, I made the great point, I think, that the best kind of entertainment is the stuff that goes against convention, more or less, right? That subverts your expectations. But there's only a certain limit to that as well, right? You can always subvert expectations in like a shitty way. Like you could, for example, decide next season that everyone in SVU is a vampire, right? And that would subvert expectation. Nobody would expect that, but it would also be retarded, right? So these are some of the pitfalls that wrestling falls into. But primarily, wrestling falls into the ultimate pitfall of taking away the seriousness, right? All of a sudden, the premise of wrestling is this. It is supposed to be a sports league where a bunch of wrestlers go and compete to determine who is the best wrestler. That's the premise, right? It's like Tekken, motherfucks. It's like Tekken. There's a tournament that's going to determine who the best fighter is, right? Now, within that tournament, there's all these characters and these storylines, right? But the context is there's a tournament. So everyone's goal should be to be WWE champion. Now, within everyone's goals are different sub-goals. I want to hurt this guy. I want to beat that guy. I want to date this diva. I want to do this. I want to do that, right? And different characters come together to make it real. Now, if one of those characters, right, is incentivized by something more so than the grand prize, it would really have to be something good. So what I mean is this. Take for example, someone like Bray Wyatt, right? Bray Wyatt is typically, he's been champion like a few times, but typically he's in these feuds that have nothing to do with the title, right? This makes sense because his character is that he's like a retarded guy who really isn't there to be champion. He's just there because he's fucking weird, right? And that's why Bray Wyatt never should have been champion. I believe his character was hurt tremendously by becoming champion, right? But for example, someone like Lashley, right? He needs to go after the title every time until something happens, like someone's trying to fuck his wife, and then it's like, all right, the title's important, but my wife's more important, so I'm gonna like beat your ass, you know? So something like that, right? These are serious storylines. Even with Bray Wyatt, you can have serious storylines. Now, when the storyline then devolves into Bray Wyatt was thrown into a lake, and now like Matt Hardy shows pictures of him and Bray Wyatt from like the 1800s, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden Bray Wyatt is like a good guy, and then he's evil again, and now he has superpowers, right? That's where things lose me and lose a lot of people, right? This seriousness is gone. It's gone when people start teleporting, when magic starts happening, or when corny shit like Undertaker coming out on his bike and there's music playing. It's like some random like Sons of Anarchy type music, right? Like, it's basically, oh, here's a badass biker guy. You know, AJ Styles is there and he's like, I'm gonna beat your ass, Taker, right? And then the Druids come out of nowhere, like stupid shit. Like, these aren't things that you would watch. Like, the intended reaction of this isn't, wow, that's cool. The intended reaction to like seeing the Druids come out during the Boneyard match is, I know what the Druids are. That's literally it. That's why they put them there. They didn't put them there because people think the Druids are cool. Nobody thinks the Druids are cool. They put them there so like the neckbeards that have been watching since WrestleMania 13, they can be like, I remember when the Druids came in WrestleMania 16. No, the Druids didn't help the match. Gallows and Anderson didn't help the match. Undertaker coming into music didn't help the match. That was not a good match, right? Even worse so, though, of course, is the Firefly Funhouse John Cena match. The fact that we haven't seen John Cena since then makes me want to throw up all over my face. You know what I'm saying? It's fucking ridiculous, right? It's not serious. John Cena's out there dancing in an NWO shirt. This is John Cena, well, like arguably the best wrestler of all time, and you're having him do this goofy shit. He should go out there and bury Bray Wyatt. That should be the end of Bray Wyatt. You know, luckily Randy Orton did that for us a little bit, right? So what I'm saying is that, right? Another thing, for example, another example I should say, of wrestling not being serious. Take, for example, this recent ban on leg kicks, right? Or sorry, on leg slaps, I should say, right? So for those of you that don't know, I'm sure all of you do know, because I'm always behind on the news, motherfucks. Like, you know how when people do super kicks and do like stupid moves, they like slap their leg to make that dumbass noise, right? WWE's banning that apparently. Now, I believe, for example, certain moves really benefit from that. Very few of them. Like the Claymore, right? The Claymore is a perfect example because the Claymore, the way he lunges forward, essentially just drops on his back while running, right? And pushes himself forward. Like, his arms and his hands are already near like his thighs. So doing like a leg slap, you know, discreetly wouldn't hurt at all. You wouldn't know that he did it, right? The super kick, you would know. Even Shawn Michaels, when he would do it, you would know that he's slapping his thigh. Then there's people like Cucky Rhodes and the Young Cucks, where it's not even flagrant. Like, I mean, sorry, like it's not even covert. It's flagrant. Like Cody Rhodes does a slap kick, right? He does the little disaster kick, and when he turns around, he full on slaps his thigh. And I'm pretty sure he slaps the thigh of the leg that he's doing the kick with. Common sense would dictate you slap your other thigh, the one that no one's looking at. This guy flagrantly slaps his thigh mid-air, right? And then like misses the kick probably, and it's so clear that it's bullshit. But think about why WWE is removing that. It's taking away the leg slap, right? Because they understand it takes people out of it, right? My grandma, for example, when I would try to get my grandma to watch wrestling, right? I'd be like, Grandma, check this out. This is so good. Look how athletic these guys are. And sometimes she'd be impressed. She'd be like, oh, these guys are athletic. Wow, look at that guy. Like, he just picked up this like, for example, like, Kurt Angle would pick up Big Show. She'd be like, wow, that's so impressive. This guy's so big. And this little bald guy picked him up. And I'm like, no, Grandma, bald guy is an Olympian. You know, like, I thought I was cool for saying that shit, right? I didn't realize how much of a nerd I came out of that conversation as. But anyways, the point is, eventually my grandma would pick up on these little things that really took her out, right? So one of them was the leg slap. She knew that this thing was fake, obviously. She's not retarded, right? But it would take her out. She's like, oh, but the guy slapped his leg. That's why the noise was made. And I'm like, shit, like, I can't say anything to that, right? It's true. So Vince McMahon or whoever the fuck decided realizes that, number one, the leg slaps have gotten out of hand. When everyone on the roster has a kick finisher, everyone's doing these leg slaps, right? Kick finishers should be rare. Like the Sweet Chin Music was an awesome finisher because it was the only one back in the day that was really a kick finisher. You know, unless you count like, I don't know, the pump kick from Steve Blackman, but it's basically Sweet Chin Music. Now everyone has like a leg finisher, you know, like a running kick finisher or a running knee. Think about how many people have that, right? And think about how many of them have other type of running strike finishers. You know, the spears that Lashley and fucking what's his face, Roman Reigns do, right? The running knee from Daniel Bryan, right? You know what I mean? All the running kicks are all running finishers. Bunch of shit, you know? So what I'm getting at is this. By eliminating the things that take you out of wrestling, right? WWE is doing us a great service, right? They really are pushing forward this narrative. And I don't want to give them too much props. Don't get me wrong, you know what I'm saying? But it's not like they're saving wrestling by doing this, right? But it is a step in the right direction. Now, it is a step in the right direction but it's within a greater step of in the wrong direction, right? Because I completely will be shocked if one of the matches at WrestleMania is not some cinematic horse shit between Orton and Bray Wyatt, right? It's not good, it's shit, but that's what's gonna happen. All right, it's gonna be some sort of like, it probably won't even be a match. It'll be like Randy Orton finally faces Alexa Bliss face to face at the new Wyatt compound. I'm almost certain it'll be something like that. And in the end, it'll be him. It'll be like Randy Orton in one of those like mirror things at the carnival where you're like scared of your own, reflection and shit like that, like a House of Horrors type of thing, right? And then eventually he'll meet the Fiend, and the Fiend will put him out. That's what's gonna happen, right? So there you go. You know what I mean? Nothing good is gonna come from this. Now, if we are to believe that the leg slaps are a step in the right direction, and WWE is correcting this, I would much rather like to see Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt in a match. Just a match. I mean, I don't want to see it at all, but if I had to, I'd rather watch a match, right? Because Bray Wyatt, all the shit I talk about him is all true, motherfuckers. I believe all of it. But he's also a good wrestler, right? Like, Bray Wyatt is one of those guys where it actually makes sense, you know? Like he's like what Samoa Joe is supposed to be. Like, he's this like stocky, not that tall, but strong, like guy that can move fast. You know, he can like hit people hard. Like, it looks like he can hit hard. You know what I mean? And he does good moves. He has cool moves. You know, he has like the Uranagi and all these like cool lifting moves, things like that. So there is potential there. It's just, I believe that the whole mystic Bray Wyatt thing needs to go. Like, it's not working, man. The magical Bray Wyatt is not working out. It's not a good gimmick, and it never was. Why? Because it takes away from the seriousness. You know, when he was like a murderous, like swamp, like, you know, cult leader type motherfucker, that was fine. Because there's people that are like that, right? There are communities that are like that, where they're led by like a Bray Wyatt type motherfucker, and some of these people are motherfuckers. Like, they're not to be fucked with. So it's interesting to see, you know? But then when he starts talking about Sister Abigail, which I thought always was supposed to be a metaphor, right? And people like the fucking retards on the internet, I wonder who Sister Abigail is. He like says in the promo, he's like, Sister Abigail, rescued us, right? So either she's like their caretaker who's long dead, right? Like a nun, sister in the sense that she's like a nun, right? Sister Abigail, or she's a metaphor for something else. You know, she's not an actual person. You know, it was never meant to be that. And then this was evidenced later when Bray Wyatt was like, oh, it's the spirit of Abigail is within me. That's when you knew shit was going on the wrong way, motherfuckers. So yeah, I'll leave it at this. Seriousness is important because now we're delving into a different subject which merits its own video. The subject of horseshit mythical figures. That's going to be up next probably, motherfuckers.